record. Thank you, lady. Okay, so this is just an informal update on what I know about what's happening in the browser space. We had one of these informal chats roughly a year ago, a little less than a year ago, as the communities in question, the browser communities, other people interested in the identity space wanted to figure out what was going to happen as browsers started to step up and do something about privacy on the web, because the some things that they were planning to do would impact identity protocols. So we're going to just give a quick rundown of what's happened since then, who's actively involved in the conversation, where things stand specifically with third-party cookies, link decoration, and bounce tracking, and what's on the short-term horizon for what's happening next. I do have the chat open if you want to ask questions. I'm also watching to see if anyone raises hands. This can be as interactive as you want, or we can save questions to the end. I have no preference. Okay, so the summary, the synopsis, the browser vendors are continuing their efforts to make privacy-related changes to their browser engines. As you may recall, browser engines are not the same thing as browsers. The browsers are built on top of those, and that becomes important when you're handling support requests, because of course, people that are using, say, Apple mobile devices exclusively, it doesn't really matter what browser they're using. They can have downloaded Chrome or Firefox or anything else, but underneath they're using WebKit, and that goes by Apple's rules. The browsers that have already blocked third-party cookies, because that is a work in progress, and Apple and Mozilla in particular have already taken great strides towards that. They're already looking at link decoration and bounce tracking as the next big thing. So there are conversations happening in those areas, and we in the SAML community really care about those far more than we care about third-party cookies. As has been the case in the past, federated authentication use cases are not as highly prioritized as responding to perceived privacy threats. And so the existence of the Federation community and our engagement in these conversations is pretty darn important. Okay, so who's having these conversations at this point? There is a federated identity community group in the W3C where our sort of general discussion is we're looking at the various proposals and the impact on federated identity and trying to figure out what, how to respond, how to provide use cases, how to provide feedback to let them know what they are or not breaking. We have one formal work item in the community group, and that's something proposed by Google called the Federated Credential Management API. A little bit more on that particular work item. So the Federated Credential Management API is very, very limited in what it can do. And right now, its nominal focus is on third-party cookies. That's what they've said. And yet, even there, what they're doing is so limited as to be probably only useful for one particular use case, that one particular use case being the account chooser that Google itself has. For all the other uses of cookies, and we'll get into what those uses are, that's it's not actually a helpful drop-in. The privacy community group is much more active than the it's more active in terms of more participants and more active in terms of more work items, but their focus continues to be very much on, again, the privacy related things. And we're starting to hear them refer to federated identity more, so we're making some progress there, but still that's not their focus, that's not their purpose. They have a GitHub repository, and there'll be links to all of those shortly. And one of the projects under discussion right this very moment is navigation-based tracking, also known as link decoration. There's the thing that you may have heard of on the news, first party sets. That's something coming out of Google. There's a lot of different balls that they're juggling. But these conversations aren't happening just in the W3C, though that's certainly a hotbed for it. The OpenID Foundation is also talking about this because so far, most of the discussions focus around OpenID Connect and OAuth. It's not really SAML based. Interestingly enough, a number of the people involved, a number of the developers involved don't realize that SAML is still a thing because it's mature, it's not changing. There's not a lot of innovation in the SAML space, so it must not be a thing, right? Right? Not right. Very not right. But that said, at least for now, where the SAML stuff isn't heavily impacted, the OpenID Connect stuff is impacted, and so the OpenID Foundation is very much engaged trying to figure out what they want to support, what they don't want to support, how they want to respond to some of this. So the OpenID Connect working group is discussing it. There are very focused groups like shared signals and events. If you have any bandwidth and can participate in some of those conversations and you're interested in OpenID Connect, that's a really good place to go have them. No, Andy, we can't keep using IE forever. All right. So I'm going to stop showing slides for a minute because I want to show you a table that we put together. The table is actually in GitHub, so you can scroll to it if you like, but I'm going to show you a slightly different view so everything is on the screen at one time. There we go. So this is a table that we've put together to say, all right, so when you're looking at third-party cookies, what exactly is available to do something different that will get around what the browsers are most concerned about in terms of tracking? And there's more than one thing, right? There is, if you're having issues, so the three things that we know for certain for sure are impacted by third-party cookie deprecation are front channel logout, session management, and I always forget the third one, token renewal. So what can you do in place of front channel logout, for example? Well, you can use back channel logout as one possible option.
Hey, Heather.
Yes.
When you say front channel logout, do you mean like just logging out of the IDP, or do you mean the sort of like orchestrated log?
This is no, this isn't single logout.
Okay, so just actually trying to terminate the IDP session fails as well.
So when you're at the RP and you want to log out, that's all you're doing. From the RP's perspective, you're logging out from that IDP session. You're not necessarily logging out from everything that IDP is doing. Tim, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just gonna say. So while it's not the same mechanism as SLO, it's similar in a sense that the IDP renders a bunch of RP iframes, and attempts to do the logout at the IDP. So if you've ever signed out of like Office 365, you'll see we kind of sit on the IDP page for a while, and what's happening in the background is it's just attempting to hit all the logout endpoints.
Well, I guess I was thinking about, that's what I was thinking about and asking the question, because like at OSU, we don't even try to do that single logout stuff to, hit all of the relying parties that are involved. But if you couldn't even log out of your own SSO session, that would of course be terrible. And
from what I understand, I mean, the Federation Credential Management API project was very interested in exploring ways to do something entirely different with front channel logout, but received no support or feedback for how they wanted to do it. So they've mostly stopped paying attention to that. And I think of the people who are paying attention, most of them are saying, well, if front channel logout isn't going to work, well, okay, we'll go to back channel. It's not ideal for various reasons, but it can be done, and that gets this out of browser land entirely. So they have no say in it.
Yeah, unfortunately, the unfortunate problem with the conversation around front channel logout is the first thing people say when they talk about front channel logout is it's brittle, which is not a good argument to needing to keep the functionality, right? So we're kind of fighting that perception as well, which is, I mean, it's not untrue. It just helps, it just doesn't help prioritize the use case for someone trying to build something new.
Right. A few other things that could help with handling third-party cookies for whatever reason. There's the OpenID shared signals and events. I can't say a lot about that, other than I know it is there. I know they're working on it, and I know it could be helpful in certain circumstances.
We could just tell them we don't care if front channel logout gets broken as long as they put in a logout button in the browser to just clear all session cookies, right?
Do you
Then we don't
really
care if
want to do that?
So, well,
we don't care if front channel logout gets broken then, because that's better. That's a lot less brittle.
Well, one of the things that a lot of people are concerned about is the browser in, up to this point has been a passive player in the identity flows. They're not the browser just passes information from point A to point B, C, D, and Q. But to have them suddenly be a broker in all of this breaks a number of assumptions and screws with a number of protocols. That said, I don't think we're going to get around it. The browsers are going to do what the browsers are going to do. So it's now a question of how do you mitigate that effort.
yeah, and unfortunately, right, it's not as easy as just a log out with clear state, because ultimately what the IDP used to have to track, whether it was stateful in the IDP or the IDP was passed some encoded blob that told the IDP of the state. Now the browser needs to map that, which ultimately means calling a new API, right? Because the browser still needs to know. They're not going to have a logout button that truly clears all site data, because that would clear all login sessions for IDPs that are not related as well, and relying parties that are not related. So.
So we're continuing to work on the information that you see here. The primary landing page is actually in the FedID CG GitHub repository. It's just a little hard to scroll through that at times when you're showing it in a presentation, which is why I have copied some of it here. The other, let's see, the other interesting table there, which is a little bit more easy to show, is probably this one, which goes through the different protocols to say what, if you're looking at the big three, third-party cookies, link decoration, redirects, who cares? for the specific primitives that we all most care about in identity flows, which things care about what? And this table exists to help chase that down. And
Heather, can you post that link maybe in chat or something? That one seems very useful to me.
sure, I can.
I mean,
It's
you
also
probably have
in
sent it.
the, well, it's also in the slides, and but absolutely, it's now also in the chat.
Yay, thank you.
And it's from this page that you can get to the third-party cookie limit mitigations page. It's all here. You just have to scroll down to the bottom to go over to this way and scroll back up. That said, at least here we can track if anyone's making changes to the document, which is why this is its primary home. Okay. So moving on to the next thing. So I mentioned that. All right. So probably the biggest thing that people are interested in that we didn't talk about on our call last year was a number of you said, all right, this is all fascinating, but we're SAML. We don't care about third-party cookies. Call me when you're dealing with the link decorations issues and bounce tracking. So, hey, guess what? There there's absolutely work in this space now. As you see, there's a URL here on this slide where we have one of the developers from Brave is an author on this. The other author is from Google, but Google hasn't decided how they formally feel about this particular work effort. So I don't understand the politics on that one, but regardless, the FedIDCG is having a call on Monday morning, my time, 8 a.m. my time, Pacific time, where the Brave author is going to come and talk to us for probably about half an hour about what this project is, you know, what they expect it to do, how they expect it to be handled. Right now, I mean, Safari has already started to do some things when it comes to trying to mitigate tracking via link decoration. And they basically have an algorithm that labels a site saying, aha, you are cross-site tracking in an evil and uncool manner. If the site is automatically redirecting user to other sites really quickly or after a short delay, if the user hasn't gone to the site, you know, they have this list of things of how they handle this. Firefox similarly uses a list-based approach. Basically, they've got the blacklist of sites that they know are uncool. Brave is doing something, it sounds like kind of similar. All of this is in the description that you'll find on that link, the nav tracking mitigations. And Google hasn't decided what they're going to do yet.
I'm curious, do we know if any of these are impacting, you know, SAML at the moment? Like I can imagine ways that Safari would think that's happening, of course, for after you have an SSO session established, you know, you're just going to bounce right through a bunch of times.
I honestly don't know. I mean, Safari at this point has such the reputation of people in support roles just assume Safari is probably not going to work, you know, and they don't chase it down any further. The answer from large companies like Salesforce to small groups like little libraries, when a user comes in and says, I'm using Safari and this isn't working, the response is, we'll stop using Safari.
Okay.
The Internet Explorer of 2022.
Yes, pretty much the Internet Explorer 2022, even though that's not a terribly useful answer.
Yeah. No, so I mean, the one thing we do know, but we don't think it's a real problem, is that Safari limits after either 7 or 10, it's very unpredictable redirect change, right? So in theory, if you're redirecting through 7 IDPs, which I think is a little extreme, like usually it's 4 to 5 max, you may get the redirection based stop. But we've noticed it just because we've tested it, but I haven't heard of anyone actually being broken because.
Tim, is this the thing that causes Safari to break Teams in the browser?
No, Teams is all third-party cookies.
Oh, okay.
Ouch.
Yeah.
It's funny, actually. We actually get surprisingly few complaints other than the CXO type person that wants to use Safari and kicks and screams. So.
Years. All right. So what's happening next? So Google has their published timeline of the big browser vendors. They're the only one that have a published timeline. Because they've got a whole lot of different projects underway, all falling under the Privacy Sandbox banner. FedCM, which is the one that I pay most attention to because it is in my community group, it is starting what are called origin trials. So it's coming out of Canary, that daily rebuild of Chrome experimentation, and moving into origin trials by the end of April. Now, the origin trial is very limited. This is going to be on Android mobile devices using Chrome only. It's the only place to experience the joy and wonder that is FedCM. The focus is only on the account chooser UX. which serves as a signal for what additional behavior the browser will allow. But the only site that really uses the account chooser UX is Google. They've asked me, can't you find anyone else that does this exact same thing? To which I've said, no, I don't know of any other site that does an account chooser the way you do it. But that's where FedCM stands. The IIW conference, which I know many of you are familiar with, it happens it's going to happen in person at the end of April in Mountain View, California. And that happens to be a 5-minute walk from Google. We're expecting a lot of very active in-person discussions at that unconference about what's happening in browser land, the impact on identity, alternate things that we can think about and propose. One of the biggest challenges we've had, especially with the Google work, especially with FedCM, is, I see both sides to this particular problem. On the one hand, the developers at Google really want concrete feedback. They want someone to have tested their stuff and to give them feedback and saying it does work or it doesn't work here, 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 and here. However, on the other side, there's people who have day jobs to do things, and they can't necessarily keep up with the speed of changes in what has been a canary daily rollout to figure out how do I test this? It's the one person who was willing to donate a day to do that. He actually was on a call with the Google developers for 4 hours just to get a prototype mocked up, and it didn't work with the next week. So Google wants concrete feedback, and that's what they're going to prioritize over everything else. And everybody else has said, we really don't have time to give you to do the kind of testing you're asking for, because we do have other work that we have to support today. So it's a tension, and Google will continue to go forward with what they have. It is an opportunity in a way. Anybody that can put time towards actual testing and giving feedback will get much stronger consideration than anyone otherwise might expect them to based on where they are or what they do. Tim?
Yeah, and I think one important thing that I've found isn't always clear is that FedCM is a new API, right? So if you don't use it, nothing changes, right? Other than there are changes coming, not directly related to FedCM, that FedCM may help with. So it's not like this doom and gloom, this feature is added and all of a sudden stuff might not work. That's not the case, right? It's even when it comes out of origin trial, you have to actively call this function.
Yes. And it's also worth mentioning that FedCM, we've pointed Privacy Sandbox. FedCM does not live in a vacuum. The developers did make an assumption that what you'll actually be using most of the time is first-party sets, and only if first-party sets doesn't work will you end up calling FedCM. I don't think that's actually entirely reasonable, especially since no other browser has indicated a willingness to support first-party sets yet. But that is sort of baked into FedCM's assumptions about what the world looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it's the unfortunate Google bubble, right? Which exists in many topics. Like, sure, first-party sets is going to help Microsoft keep first-party stuff working, like Teams and SharePoint and all that, but it's not going to help a university that uses their own sign-in against the cloud service.
Yeah. There are services like Seamless Access, which is one that we're pretty familiar with in the academic community, which provides a central WAF service. Well, that smart cookie, that smart button that relies on browser local storage, which isn't a cookie, but for the sake of what they're doing, might as well be. That smart button isn't going to be smart anymore for any of the people who have done the advanced integrations like Springer Nature or Elsevier or any of the others, because it won't be able to read that information, and first-party sets does not help with that. Unfortunately, FedCM doesn't help with that either. At this point, nothing we've seen is going to help with that other than moving everyone to a standard integration where they actively go to seamlessaccess.org.
the unfortunate part of all this, right, is like FedCM, you know, in the idea of this account chooser could very well suit this use case, right? Could become an IDP picker, right? And maybe even a better user experience, but they don't see the difference, unfortunately, or they do see the difference between IDP picker and account picker, but they're very laser focused on one use case, unfortunately.
Yep. They have said that, you know, on their roadmap is being able to choose multiple IDPs and being able to at least move this to desktop and not just Android. But that's probably much later this year.
One other thing that you just reminded me, I think the other very interesting part of this discussion is the usual reminder that this, unless Safari implements FedCM, you won't get it in Chrome on iOS or Edge on iOS either.
Yep. Thank you, browser engines. And that's the update that I have for you all today. Are there any other questions, discussions, comments?
Maybe you can summarize if you know when things are going to start breaking. Yeah, I guess in the SAML world that I care about, right?
Crystal Ball says 2 years, maybe in about 2 years. I think it will take that long for them to figure out, to start toying with the navigation based tracking projects and things like that, and the other browser vendors actually deploying it and getting the testing in, all of that other good stuff. I think it's probably 2 years or so. They may move faster, but it won't be a standard. It will be a lot of things out in beta perhaps, and the browsers will not have converged on any one thing. So it may break in Safari. I know, don't be so shocked. Something might break in Safari sooner, but overall, I would say probably 2 years for it to reach Chrome, which is the biggest market share at the moment.
The solutions, such as they are being proposed and such, are they, are they all pretty much things that require some sort of rewrite or code change of IDPs and SPs to implement?
Well, from what I read about the navigation-based tracking, no, that doesn't require anything on the IDP or the RP to do differently, because they're doing algorithms based on behavior. They're not expecting protocol changes, as far as I can tell. Tim, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the navigational tracking, I think, is so early that it's hard to say. At least, I think in the FedCM side, at least, to give Google some credit, one of their design goals was like the least amount of changes on the relying party as possible, because IDPs are better positioned to make a change in general. That's obviously not true for everyone, but I think for the navigational tracking, one thing Apple is proposing is this concept of the login status, which is essentially flipping a bit, and calling an API and flipping a bit from logged out to logged in, which we think Safari would use that as an input to their engine to influence the redirect behavior, right? Because the one thing to know about Safari is they don't treat anything as binary, right? Like everything is an input to ITP, right? Nothing is unfortunately ever going to be predictable. But we think that there's like these signals that could be added, that could be set by the IDP to just help influence ITP more. That's probably the best way. So it's a login status API, for example, is a minor change, right? It's a change, but it's a minor change.
Yeah, I'm trying to sense out, maybe kind of putting my CTAB hat on here or something of like, well, what are we, does this mean like just imagining something. Okay, well, so does it mean for like baseline expectations in the Federation that, you know, all IDPs must support some new feature, right? So that we actually have a functional Federation
I
afterwards.
don't think we know yet, Andy.
Yeah.
I mean, by all means, drop a watch on that repository so you can see as they update it and change it and flesh out the ideas. That repository being the navigation-based tracking one.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the one I'm gonna pre-declare that I am not in favor of anything related to browser policies, but I think it's important to the conversation. If your users are signing in with their organizational account to a browser, you know, there are methods of pushing like, you know, a different set of cookie policies or redirect policies that, you know, are bound back to that org. I know that's not it's not a great solution since not everyone does that. But we do think, at least for the most extreme cases, either a manual config change or, you know, some kind of browser policy that comes via your signed in profile will at least be the absolute minimum, like last resort. But you know, I have kind of
the only sites I can think of that still do that level of management is like government, where the government, you know, absolutely controls what can be installed on a system and has all those policies set up and whatnot. But I don't know of any higher education site that does that.
Well, I think it in my, I don't have anything to back this up, but from my impression is it's one of those things that's probably there that people don't know they can realize. Because if I have an organizational account for brandeis.edu and I sign into Chrome is, whether they say, you know, there is a management layer that's there, whether it's enabled or not, right? So you do have the ability to push browser policy from brandeis.edu in Google Workspace, for example. That's not to say people are using it, but you know,
Right.
the mechanism is there. So.
Okay. Wow, I can just see all the ways that would go horribly wrong as students say, "What? You're changing the configuration on my computer? Riot in the street, riot in the street." Oh
well,
wait,
it's funny too, because
basketball.
it's funny too, because it's probably already happening, right? And it's probably little things that ultimately are beneficial, right? Because it's not something you generally would see. Like, I think the only indication of it is like it'll have like a little work icon next to your profile name in the little account chooser. But there are things like, you know, if you remember the IE trusted zones, right? Which is so funny that it's so relevant here, right? That kind of stuff organizations do tend to do via browser policy today, but that's not something the user would like be aware of.
Other questions, comments?
There's not that the browser policy thing, and you know, might joke about IE or whatever, you know, but this is one of those spaces where it's almost impossible for us to control our user, like what their users are doing. You know, obviously some of our users are going to be using Safari, you know, whether that's just because they're on iOS or their own choice, or you're going to run various, you know, strange browsers and stuff. And then it's not exactly different in you know, within a multilateral federation or whatever, but you know, you just have so many different players involved. If you're only talking about IDPs, right, then you kind of have that relationship and stuff. If there's some sort of one of these changes that starts impacting the SP side of things, then you know, what a mess, right?
Yeah, and I really see this as, like, let's say we fast forward 2 years and Google doesn't have their stuff together and something breaks, right? I just see this as kind of the way we handle Safari today, which is like, you can try Safari, but if it doesn't work, you have to try something else. And if we can guarantee you if you use this thing, it will work, you know, as the ultimate backup option. I know it's not the ideal for the default state.
Right. When I've talked to the folks within the team at Google that I talk to most, because remember, when we talk about Google and we refer to them as a single entity, They are not a single entity. They are a massive, massive schizophrenic organization that the left hand may not even know that there is a right hand that's doing something. So, but for the folks
The
that I've
joke is that they rebranded to Alphabet because A through Z doesn't talk to each other.
pretty much. The folks I work with think that this is, all of these pieces, the privacy sandbox bits and pieces of figuring out all the ways the browsers can help deal with privacy issues on the web is something of a 10-year project. So 2 years, actually it's probably kind of optimistic, but I can imagine things starting to break then, but they won't be finished breaking for a while after that, as they try and figure out what they're willing to fix. And when you step away from what they're not willing to fix, what does that mean for the standards themselves, the protocols themselves, and how do those need to change? So all of that is still up in the air. Who knows?
My head is running through, OSU is probably going to end up, well, our goal, our direction right now is to switch everything over to Azure SSO and then probably front in common with the Cirrus Bridge product, for our gateway or whatever. But okay, so we've got a proxy, hopping things through. And so does that, is that any, it's going to have the same problems, of course. Now there's sort of two IDPs involved in this chain of things, but yeah.
I am almost certain that the proxy use cases, the way we do them in higher ed, is not on anybody's radar. Tim, maybe you've got some idea. Have you ever when we talk about proxy services, do you know what we're talking about?
I do, just because I spent some time in higher ed, but I think I'm
Okay.
a snowflake in that regard.
That's kind of what I thought. I don't know of any sector outside of higher ed that uses proxies the way we do.
Yeah, and I got pulled into this whole Cirrus and AAD bridge discussion too. So, yeah, I don't know if I think that would be the same scenario as the rest, right? I don't think anything changes there.
Okay.
Anything AAD to Microsoft first party would be all OpenAD Connect, which has its own set of problems than anything federated off via SAML would have the link integration problem.
It is going to be interesting, isn't it? Well, we are certainly going to have more of these updates over the next few years, I'm sure, because at this point it's literally there is stuff happening. There are conversations happening. If you can be involved in the early stages to help direct them, that's best. But understanding that there are limited resources and you may just need to react to what the powers that be come up with. We'll come back to this, probably 6 months to a year from now with all right, here's where things are now. And to give you all a sense of what does that mean for you in terms of, is there anything that you have to change or anything that you need to tell your Federation members to do in order to survive the brave new world. All right. Any other questions?
I wonder if the attendance.
ahead.
I wonder if the attendance is kind of low. If people aren't, I don't know. I'm finding it difficult to keep track of all of the things that are happening here and whether I'm impacted and
Yeah.
Not through any fault of your guys. I mean, that's just my own level of interest and busyness and stuff as well. But it seems like obviously it seems like a pretty big deal, and but our attendance here is kind of low for this thing, and so
It's a very big deal, but like I was talking to Tim's boss a while back about some of this and the pressure she was under from her management at Microsoft for, can you tell us when it's a real thing? Just tell us when it's a real thing and we actually have to react to something, because all of this doom and gloom prep work to it is not helping. And
If you stop recording, I can give you even more.
hold that thought. But I mean, that's pretty typical for businesses, and I'm including, higher ed institution as businesses in that case. There's, on the one hand, yes, there's a certain level of appreciation for, it's good for us to know that something's going to break and we need to do something. But until you give us concrete deadlines as to, here's when it's going to break, here's what's going to break, here's what you need to do, we don't have time to deal with the fear, uncertainty, and doubt you're sowing, because we don't have the resources to engage, to direct what's going to break, to influence those conversations, to influence the solutions. So where I am is, I'm at I want people to be influencing the solution stage, and where all the C-star, of the world are tell us when it's time to actually develop against something and what we need to do. So
Yeah, I think about a couple different phases there. One phase might be, like we are for example, like, okay, we're definitely going to break link decoration on, 2025, whatever it is.
right.
Then anybody using link decoration can at least say, okay, I have to go get something else by then, right?
Right.
Or, at another level might be that, maybe like, okay, well, we're going to break link decoration or whatever it is, and by the way, and here is the thing that you should be doing. You should be using some API or whatever for doing authentication and federated authentication. But we're in the phases before that. We're like, well, something is going to break about link decoration in some way, but maybe it's just going to be an algorithm. You can work around it, or and so not having any sort of target of either like the thing that is actually going to break and when it's going to happen, or the thing that you should move to, I guess kind of means that you don't really know, like if you say like, okay, well, cookies don't work anymore, we need to find something else. Okay, well, we'll go find something else. But we can't do that until we know, I guess, or we won't put any effort into it until we know for sure.
That's what I often hear, unfortunately. What I'd love to turn around and say is, well, what would you prefer? Would you prefer it be the algorithm, or would you prefer having to build an app? I mean, what do you want to come out of this? Because that's the input that's needed. Some of the input that's needed at this point is, if you just wait for, tell us what we need to do, and you end up finding it entirely unpalatable, well, sucks to be you, because we tried to get you in early enough to influence this. But and yet resources are not infinite. You do have to target where you put them, and there's stuff breaking today. There's security incidents today. There's new service providers to integrate today. It's not an easy problem. All right, on that cheerful note, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and then Tim can say whatever he wants as soon as I find the button.
Oh, yeah, this